The funding situation is probably the most difficult that the sector has seen, and that's decades in the making. When we were in government, we established Te Pukenga, which was about coordinating a national polytechnic model. Is when we look at our future population in this country. You know, we know that we have growth in number of Māori young people, Pacific young people, and migrant young people. And so when we think of the economy, we've got to make sure that that particular population group
Okay, kia ora whanau, and welcome to another podcast from voiceofaroha. I have a very special guest here with me in the studio. Is a member of Parliament, Shanan. Shanan, how are you?
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming to our show. It's just great to have this corridor with you. Before I start, I always do this with my guest. And if I give you that mic to introduce yourself, how you want to introduce yourself to the people? Which we know you're a member of Parliament. But
yeah,
but
who am I, right?
Yeah,
how
you would love to
Ka
do
pai
that.
tēnā. Well, e mihi ana ki a koe.
Yeah.
Mō tō manaakitanga o te kaupapa nei, he kaupapa Aotearoa mō ngā tangata katoa I roto I te Aotearoa. I'm pretty passionate about my whakapapa, both my Māori and my European ancestry. I think it's really helped me build who I am as a politician, but most importantly as a person. I'm a te reo Māori learner,
Right.
and would love to be better and continuously, strive to be better in te reo Māori. I love my family, and I love my German Shepherd named Whiti.
Whiti.
He's 19 months. He's our baby at home, but he keeps us pretty busy with his demands, needing to go for a walk, needing to be fed, but just the highlight of our household. I've been grateful to do the job that I do in Parliament, and that really came about through the opportunities that others gave me, and I'm grateful for being able to effectively stand on the shoulders of giants to get me to where I am today. And now it's my obligation to give back, to make sure that others have those opportunities too.
Wow. Beautiful introduction. Thank you for sharing that. Shanan, you mentioned that to the current leadership you have, the rule. But definitely that there is many things have attracted them to choose you to be there. So would you share with us, like as a young MP there, that is the journey of the leadership? What does leadership mean to you?
I've been brought up that leadership is about service, service to our communities, service to people, that you do, the hard yards and you do your time. And along the way, you get different opportunities. Whether that's leadership in your own family or you're in your community or in politics, you're given jobs, you step up into those jobs, do them, and then you get more jobs, right?
Yes.
But that is leadership to me, because it all comes back to the common good, looking after people. The kaupapa of this podcast is aroha, ensuring that people feel loved, they feel included, and as a leader, I feel like that's part of my job today.
Right, awesome. And what inspired you to enter the world of politics? You
This-
a member of Parliament.
Yeah, it started well before Parliament.
Right.
I think I felt confronted by some of the issues that my whānau and my community faced. I grew up in the Hawke's Bay. I was the youngest of five. My dad was a freezing worker and retrained as a kura kaupapa Māori teacher.
Right.
And so that really transformed the life of our whānau at that particular time. You start to not only have education in the household and understand what that means, but you have a regular income. You have security amongst our whānau. And, I'm a beneficiary of that. I got to go to university. And train, be educated, learn the things that I wanted in, the large city of Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland.
Right.
And so that's why I've always been passionate about education, because it changed my father's life, my life, and that's why I'm pleased now to, be Labour's tertiary education spokesperson. But there's a heck of a lot of mahi to do.
Absolutely. I just love that how you find that the environment around you with the family, that kind of when you see these things, like you brought example as your father being a teacher of Te Reo Māori, and these things will inspire the young people or the persons to look at them, then you think, okay, how I can be like them or can be better, what I can do. So that's, and what I also liked in your corridor, that you defined leadership as a service, the community service. That's the big one. That's a good one to define leadership. Exactly, it's about service. It's not about being the boss. It's actually opposite, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm the youngest in my whānau. I have 3 elder brothers,
Right.
and so I'm used to being told what to do or serving them, doing the things that they need to. And so in my family, I'm that person that organises us to come together. Make sure there's a kai on the table when we need it, make sure that we stay connected and are communicating, and I love that job. I love my siblings, and, I take family and whānau very seriously, but it takes work too.
Absolutely. Amazing. And now you're in the parliament, and you have 2 portfolio, right? So you are very passionate and you look after the rainbow issues and also tertiary education. Would you be able to tell us about the why this is passion to you? And also what is this portfolio about? Like when we say member of this party having this, what does mean for our audience to maybe knowing better what exactly we mean when you have these 2 portfolio under you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you ask anyone that's, whether they're a friend or a colleague of mine, they will say that I'm a hard worker.
Yeah.
And so, the opportunities that I've had, including these portfolios, come out of hard work. As I mentioned, you get given some small jobs, then you get some more jobs. I picked up the Rainbow Issues portfolio for Labour when we came into opposition in 2023. It was a new portfolio because while we've been rich in the number of openly gay and out MPs in the Labour Party forever, at this particular time when we were experiencing the global challenges, the discrimination against the rainbow community, I said to Chris Hipkins that we really need a single voice or a coordinated voice on behalf of our party to talk to the issues of the day, particularly around the discrimination. We want to ensure that our kids going to school feel safe in who they are, they're encouraged to be who they are, and that they have the right identity in place. And so Chippy, as we call him, was happy to give me that role. Recently in the reshuffle, because of my background in tertiary education, it made sense, and it was the one portfolio that I've really aspired to pick up during my time in politics. Before politics, I started in the call centre at the University of Auckland in student information. I then continued a career into student recruitment and marketing, went to AUT and spent about 8 years working in developing pathways for young people to come into university. Different initiatives, different engagement methods, and was supported at that particular time through funding through the Encouraging and Supporting Innovation Fund with the Tertiary Education Commission. That enabled me to develop 5 particular youth engagement projects, coming from business to engaging with Year 10 boys, to Pacific Business Challenges, through training leaders in secondary schools, building a relationship and familiarity with universities so that young people could see themselves in that particular environment and to break down some of the perceived barriers that were in front of them. My final 6 years before politics was at Te Wānanga or Aotearoa, which is an indigenous model of learning, quite different to the university structure. It brings in Te Ao Māori, but serves not just Māori,
Yes.
a very large Pacific and migrant communities in that. So, I'm a full believer that education is for everyone, that the system should work for everyone. And with my experience, I think I'm able to step up into the tertiary education portfolio quite well.
Beautiful. So,
and I'm passionate, right?
Yes,
you can tell.
Exactly. And so that's why you straight away made me to jump from another question, which is, from your career, if Labour come back to the government, if you get the portfolio of minister, what will be your policies in tertiary education? What do you be say, okay, this will be my first or second priority to push first?
The funding situation is probably the most difficult
That's
that
right.
the sector has seen. And that's decades in the making. When we were in government, we established Te Pukenga, which was about coordinating a national polytechnic model and vocational education to ensure that provision was available no matter where you lived across Aotearoa, New Zealand. We've seen some success in that, despite some teething problems from the outset. But we are building both. What we have seen is better fiscal outcomes. That the sector is becoming more sustainable, and that's really a good achievement of how we ensure that those polytechs across the country are supported to do what they do. Right. In the university sector, we put in 4.2% increase in funding. That's unlikely to continue under the current government. And that means that over the last 10 years that we've got about a 9.5% shortfall of funding to keep up with inflation for universities. Yeah. My biggest worry in that space is that means that funding will be cut to equity initiatives. So when I talk about my story and that I want these opportunities for every young person in New Zealand, no matter where you come from, those are the opportunities that start to get taken away when you remove equity funding. We need to invest, I guess, in young people to make sure that they are going into higher learning, whether that's an apprenticeship scheme, whether that's going into a Bachelor of Arts, whether that's going into a Bachelor of Health Science and becoming a doctor in this country. Because employment rates, which are really, really important, unemployment's spiking at the moment, and tertiary education is always the default and the solution during what is a very difficult time economically. So it doesn't make sense to me that the government is underinvesting in tertiary education at this particular time. So that's something that the sector is asking me to focus on.
Right. That's good. And you mentioned about the equity funding, which is maybe some people will be asking why the equity are important. Do you want to elaborate on that one? Which, in my experience, I could share a lot, but I want to hear your view about why it's important and why also is a kind of concern to you.
Yeah. Equity is important because it's about supporting young people into higher learning and removing the barriers that obstruct them from enrolling in tertiary education and eventually being successful in graduating. So we know, particularly for Māori, Pacific and migrant communities, they experience more barriers than other New Zealanders to be successful in our education system. That requires a bit more pastoral support, a bit more cultural support. When somebody didn't do science at secondary school, and extra tutoring is needed, equity funding supports accelerated learning so that person can achieve and be successful in the program that they're learning. Yeah. So one's about access, but the other one's about success and ensuring that when people come into our system, whether they're an apprentice or whether they are at university, that they are successful, they have a positive experience in education, even though it's hard, but they walk out feeling a sense of success, they're completing their qualification, and they're going into a workforce to create better opportunities for themselves and their whānau.
Yeah, love that, which is access and success. And I think that's also, answered that. Many people think, but everyone should be equal. That's actually, with equity will be equality, But But when you have two people who someone have already is ready, then someone else need a little bit support to get them to the same level to compete. That's the equity we're talking, access and success.
Yeah.
Beautiful ones. And I have...
The other point that I'll make in that is when we look at our future population in this country,
Right.
you know, we know that we have growth in number of Māori young people, Pacific young people, and migrant young people. And so when we think of the economy, we've got to make sure that that particular population group is doing well, that they are successful and that they are set up for good employment. In the long run, that will make them active contributors economically to our country. You know, socially, that's great for us. And culturally, you know, we can be far more proud of our country on an international stage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully said. And I want to jump into another portfolio, but then we may actually come back and see how it goes. Yeah. But there's another portfolio you have, which is in rainbow issues. So I have a question about, in your experience, what is like most pressing challenges that currently facing our LGBTQ community? From if you are hearing people talking to you about them, what's those main concerns you think currently is happening?
There's so much discrimination and hate that has been placed upon our rainbow community for a good decade, but we've really seen it ramp up in New Zealand over the past couple of years, particularly with global politics, and that's come into New Zealand. In its simplest form, you know, I say that all of us have a whānau member that belongs to the rainbow community. We're interconnected. It's not something, you know, being rainbow or being out isn't something that happens over there anymore. You know, this is about all of us, and they are our whānau members. And so, you know, whether you're a parent, whether you're an auntie and uncle, a cousin, a sister or a brother, you know, it matters that all of our rainbow community feels supported and loved and recognised for who they are. I've called for the Minister of Police to ensure that the rainbow community feels safe in our country. That was a commitment that this government made when they came in, that every New Zealander will feel safer under their watch. That's not what the rainbow community is experiencing currently. Right. And, you know, every member of our society should feel safe in their relevant communities, and I do want the government to do more in that particular space. We've seen the attacks from Destiny Church across Pride events, but, you know, while the government might manage the here and now, is when I ask questions of the minister that he says we don't actually track how many incidents, hate incidents, are associated with Destiny Church. And so, therefore, I've asked the questions, well, how is this likened to your approach to gangs? And if this government can't stand gangs, and they've been very proactive around getting on top of gangs, particularly with the gang patch legislation as an example. Yeah. Second to that is when we look at terrorism. And so the New Zealand Police, you know, will track and monitor what is perceived terrorism in this country. But when it comes to our rainbow community, we don't have the same tracking mechanisms in place to predict the risk of certain events, to ensure their safety. These are no longer isolated incidents. We've got a history of a particular group that has stormed a public library, that they continue to turn up and break down barriers at public events. They stand outside our schools protesting while our kids are going into school. They damage property through pedestrian crossings. And so my attempt has been able to articulate to the public that these actions, some of them criminal actions, are no different to gangs. And that feels quite different, and we shouldn't treat the rainbow community any differently. And so that's why I've called on the government to ensure the safety of every person in our community, including our rainbow community.
Absolutely. And with that one, we'll nicely tap to my next question. But I want to still stay here. What do you think the approach of the current government? How is the response so far? Like, as it being in opposition, are you guys happy what they are doing, or they still need more to be done to make sure safety is there?
The government have actively repealed legislation that the government has actively repealed legislation or tools that protect the rainbow community.
Right.
I haven't been impressed with how they have responded to Destiny Church, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, the Minister of Education has removed the relationship and sexuality guidelines from schools. That was a resource and tools that we put in to our schools at the request of teachers and of families because of the extent of bullying that Rainbow Tamariki experienced in our school system. They recognise a gap in people's understanding, but also, most importantly, for everyone, it meant that our children were being taught about good, healthy relationships, no matter who you were, and consent.
Yeah.
And, with some of our negative statistics in this country, that's a really good thing for our kids. The government's repealed that. The Minister of Education has repealed that. She promised to replace it, but there's no evidence of that at this stage. So I'm really concerned about that.
Right. So it's looked like to me there is a kind of policies that have been built, and the next government scrap it and gain. Do you think like there will be some like certain things about security, about safety of community should be like bipartisan agreements? Would you support such a things?
We would love to work in a bipartisan way.
Right.
And I think, every politician might say that. I'm not convinced that that's the reality of our democratic system in New Zealand. In Parliament, we're set up as the ayes and the nays, government and opposition.
Yeah.
It's my job as an opposition MP to hold the government to account for their actions.
Yes.
And to advocate for the communities that require our advocacy. There are some things that I think that we can and should work on, and the safety of our community is probably one of them.
Absolutely.
Because we agree that everyone should feel safe in this country, and no matter who you are, that you shouldn't experience the level of discrimination, the level of hate. You shouldn't walk down the street and think that somebody's following you. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable going into a public bathroom because of who you are and what risk you might be in at that particular stage. So, I encourage the government to work with us to ensure that the rainbow community are safe.
Yeah, great, awesome. Sharon, what do you think about this question? It says, do you think like representation matter, and why?
And when I was elected in 2020, we had the most representative parliament that we've ever had under Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah.
We had overachieved the goal of having 50% women in parliament across the whole of parliament, not just in parties. That we had representatives that reflected the migrant communities.
Yes.
That we had a number of Māori from across the country that represented Māori communities, and similarly with Pacific communities. And so I was really proud in the last government that we achieved those sorts of things. I look at that we had a speaker who was of Māori descent and came from one of the Māori seats, one of the highest positions that one can hold in the New Zealand Parliament.
Absolutely.
That the number of Māori ministers, Māori and Pacific ministers that sat in government's executive. Incredible. And with that, you saw better outcomes for all communities in this country. My concern now is under the current government. We have no rainbow representation in the National Party, no rainbow representation in the New Zealand First Party. We have one representative in the ACT Party. So my question there is, when it comes to representation, who's representing the rainbow community? The issues that I've talked about today on the government's about to make a decision on the future of access to puberty blockers for trans and non-binary children. Who has lived experience to represent those communities adequately at the cabinet table? And that concerns me, because the government isn't engaging with key groups that are able to help inform their decision making, and instead you end up making a political decision which isn't in the best interests of the particular groups that are affected by your decisions. So in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, we believe in a representative parliament. We believe in democracy, but I'm not sure that I know that we are not as representative as we can and we should be in this country, and that's where we're seeing us go backwards on some of the most progressive legislation that our country has seen.
Right. Absolutely. And just make me thinking about the current policies that the current government is doing, especially the Te Treaty. Been a lot of conversation, and I think it's going nowhere, with also agreement with other parties of the coalition that they will not vote it out. Right. So do you think why they are doing this? Why they you want to touch such issues, things that just distributing the public? In your view as a politician, as a positions, what are your thoughts about the Te Treaty and why it's happening this? Why do we need that conversation now? Is it against the democracy, or what is going on? Why one party, they are just trying to push this?
A lot of this is just politically motivated.
Okay. Is it campaigning for the next time, or?
Definitely. And it was campaigning in the last election too.
Right.
Because this narrative, an anti-Māori agenda, started well before the last election. And similarly, if I look back, under Don Brash, it worked quite well for them then too. Because when we're working to progress better outcomes for Māori, as an example, or to reflect partnership of te tiriti o Waitangi in this country, the political narrative that the right will roll out is that other people are missing out as a result. And that's simply not true. When we look at health statistics as an example, and we reformed the whole health sector. We established Te Aka Whai Order, the Māori Health Authority, and Te Whatu Order, for New Zealand health overall. Those two worked in partnership. It wasn't one or the other. If you're Māori in the health sector, then you certainly experienced both systems. But when Māori die at least 7 years younger than their counterparts in this country, we should be concerned about that. And so setting up initiatives like that are about being more responsive. Yes, honouring te tiriti o Waitangi, but actually having genuine care who don't have the same health outcomes in this instance or other outcomes than other people in New Zealand. And I think different population groups, not just Māori and Pacific, when we look at aged care, for example, that is a targeted suite of policies for a particular group that needs support in an area. Same way we look at young people. Same way we look at early childhood education. A good government is about being responsive to different groups in New Zealand and working really hard to ensure that everyone does well. But the damage of te tiriti o Waitangi is done. The trust and confidence, the relationship between Māori and the government, that's pretty strained at the moment. There's low trust there. But what I've really loved in this past 12 months of the Treaty Principles Bill, an attempt, to really attack Māori and take away rights under something that was signed back in 1840, is that the general public support Māori. They've come on board, that it's worked the opposite way, I think, that the ACT Party wanted it to work. Sure, there's, some right-wing people that have really grabbed onto this and want to continue it, and that will continue into the next election. But overall, the average New Zealander, loves being part of a country that has an Indigenous heritage.
Absolutely. And yes, I think what also was inspiring to see people lined up, which is also speak to the democracies. People spoke out. People have said no. Majority of people, that refuse to have any kind of principal bills to go ahead or anything. Because when you talk about democracy, then I think now it's also need to be respected, the voice of the people, that they say no to it. So that's where I think in issues or things that matter to community, you will see the voice of public. When they feel that it's not right for our country, they will stand up. That's what will make New Zealand unique. On the uniqueness of Aotearoa, I want to ask you a question about, well, time is going, but I want to save it for 2 questions. Let's see how we will do. So Aotearoa, New Zealand have been always known internationally and even that they are unique. They are most peaceful, beautiful country and things. So how I can frame this question, in political space, how you think in your vision as a young Māori MP standing in those leaderships, how do you want to see that Aotearoa to be more unique? And what will be kind of, from that question, direct you questions to our young people to stand up for these rules?
Yeah. I'm so proud of Aotearoa when we go internationally. But I'm so disappointed that when you travel now and people go, what the heck is happening in New Zealand? They don't understand why we're going backwards on effectively race relations. It's something that all of us have been very proud of, and particularly for our rangatahi, for our young people, that they've grown up, appreciating good race relations, good understanding of each other's cultures. They celebrate that. And, I really look to our young people as, our way forward, how our future in this country is going to be. I can't wait for them to grow up so we don't have to deal with such narrow-minded political agendas that discriminate against, particular people in our country. So to them, I just say, kia kaha tonu, keep going. They know what is right. We've built a wonderful generation of young people who have the good New Zealand values. They believe in inclusion. They believe in diversity. And I think that's going to set us up well for the future. Where we're at the moment is merely a blip. That in 10 years' time, we will look back. We will feel embarrassed about some of the decisions that were made under this government. And no doubt when we walk into next year's election, that I believe that New Zealanders will do what's right, that they will vote in the interests of our country, and they don't want this discomfort of race relations. That's so 1990s, it's so 1800s. New Zealanders want a progressive society that they can be proud of, where everyone does well.
Awesome, that's great. Thank you, Shanan. I have just one last question, then we can finish this, about, the cost of livings. And it's again back to the tertiary education. So students are going through a lot. What will be your policies toward them? Let's say if tomorrow Labour Party is coming back to the government, what you will advocate for, what you will push for especially interest of students?
The Labour Party has quite a democratic process for establishing our policies moving forward. So any party member can put up a policy across anything, and there's a number of policies that have come up around the cost of living and particularly how we can support young people in tertiary education. The thing is that the government promised that New Zealanders would experience cost of living relief, but no one, apart from landlords really, that I've spoken to, feel any different. In fact, they feel like things have become more expensive. Public transport in Wellington and Auckland, as an example, that used to be half price for people under 24. They've seen that cost really impact on going to work, going to university. And so that's particularly concerning. Similarly, we've seen other costs of energy, rent. I was in Otago yesterday at the university, and the Students' Association was telling me the price of their rent. And my response was, that's the same price as what young people would pay in Auckland. Unbelievable. And so we've got to get the basics more affordable, whether that's your rent, your power, the petrol or public transport prices, so that everyone can do what they need to, that they have enough money at the end of the day. It worries me that 1 in 4 tamariki in our country are going hungry on the daily. And that's not just children, that goes into families, that goes into students. And it's unbelievable in a country like ours that people don't have enough money for a basic kai.
Yes, unfortunately. Very well said, and we are very looking forward for future conversations as well, Shanan, during the elections or after that. I'll see how it's going. But I really want to take time to thank you for your korero, and it was beautiful to have these conversations with you today and talk about some of the portfolio that you are passionate about, and I saw the passion with you. And also want to thank you for being like a role model for many young people who watch us and listen to this podcast. So by that one, I want to give you maybe last words. If you want to send any message to the young people who would love to stand for leadership, what will be your advice or message to them?
Yeah. Tēnā koe Māori ora kia tātou katoa. Thank you for having me. And my final words, I go back to leadership is about service. It takes hard work to, get to where we want to be. I was lucky enough that I had people that carved the pathway for me to be me, but also to do the job that I get to do now. And so, it's my obligation to give back as well. For Labour, our focus moving forward is around jobs, health and home, and tertiary education for me underpins all of that. But when it comes to every rangatahi in this country, I go back to I want them to have exactly the same opportunities that I had at their age, and I will be working very hard to ensure that they do.
Beautiful. Kia ora. Thank you. That's awesome. Then we have one tradition we do in our podcast, which is, here we go, we call it our guest messages.
Oh boy.
So what do we do here? There's a big guest. Well, you will also have opportunity. There's a question have been written. We will ask it to you.
Yeah.
I just open. Let's see what will be the questions from the last guest. You will not know who. If only you watch the YouTube and track who
what was
there.
the one that you asked Barbara Edmonds?
Right. Let's see. Okay. Then you will also have a chance to write a question for the next guest.
Okay, good.
Great. So here's the question. What it says. Are you leaving to help others to grow in their purpose and callings?
I really hope I am. And if anything, I hold myself to quite high standards. Sometimes I achieve those and sometimes I don't. But most of all, I feel pretty confident that if anything, I'm working hard to do my best at the job that I've been given at this time, and get to serve as much as I can for the period that I'm in this job. I think every politician must understand that we aren't in these jobs forever, and so we've got to make the most of it to support others while we're doing this mahi.
Beautiful. Thank you so much again, Shanan.
Kia ora.
Much appreciated.